A potager is a kitchen garden with attractive herbs, vegetables, and flowers. It can be as simple as a few planters on a deck, or as elaborate as a formal display garden. Horticulturalist Marjorie Mason takes you on a grand tour of Potager Gardens. Welcome to Richters Seminars. This video presentation is from a series of free educational seminars on herb and garden topics offered each year at Richters.
And yes, it is a slow spring, so the sheet that I've prepared for you, an edible gardening schedule, is a little bit out of sync for this year for some way. In some ways, not in all, but in some ways it's a little bit out of sync, and we'll sort of address that as we go along. I am really, really fortunate to be able to travel around the world and visit other people's gardens, because it's where I learn a great deal. I take people with me. Someone once said to me, "Wouldn't you love to just go on a garden trip and not drag 20 people along behind you?" And at first I thought, yeah, then I thought, no, I'd be pretty silly standing in a garden saying, "Oh, look at that, isn't that beautiful? What a great idea." And I'm talking to myself. So it's much better to have a group of enthusiastic gardeners travel with me and learn with me. And it's where I first learned the word potager. Potager comes from the French word potage, meaning soup. Okay, so it's all about eating. But a potager is also a thing of beauty, and it's usually done in a rather formal setting. This book, The Art of the Kitchen Garden, The Art of the Kitchen Garden. Now just think how wonderful that is. Gives you ideas of how to plan your potager so that it's decorative as well as edible. Now, the first potager that I actually visited was Rosemary Veery's, and she really got things going back to the garden, if you will. And now, when you go to any of the large gardens in the British Isles, they all have edibles, as you're going to see from the slides. They all have edibles growing in with their ornamentals, or sometimes by themselves. And I think one of the biggest things that's just happened recently is that Kew Gardens, and maybe you've seen it. How many of you have seen it on TV recently? Monday night's TVO. Well, everybody, you can go search it out on YouTube. That's one of the great things about computers, is that you can find things like this show that's just happened. It's called Kew, K-E-W, for the Gardens of Kew, Kew on a Plate. Okay, it's absolutely amazing. They've taken some of the ornamental gardens at Kew, they've moved them out, they've planted fruit and vegetables. And they don't just make it all glamorous and everything works. When the garlic got rust, they showed you it got rust and talked about how to deal with it. So they not only tell you how to grow the vegetables, show you how to plant them and the fruits, but they tell you the history of them, then how to harvest them, and then this wonderful chef, Raymond Blanc, comes in and makes wonderful dishes. So if you haven't seen Kew on a Plate, there's 4 episodes. They run an hour each, spring, summer, fall, and winter. And it's all about gardening right through. It's not just growing tomatoes for the summertime. It's the year in your garden, and how you can sustain yourself as much as possible with the bit of space you have by your own veggies and fruit. I was raised on a market garden farm outside of Peterborough, so I've been gardening since I could walk. And the interesting thing is that we only purchased probably sugar, salt, pepper, flour. Everything else we did on our own farm. And it's pretty amazing if you have enough space to do that, back to the good old days, because now it's become the way of the future. And so many schools are having gardens, and it's the way it should be. Rooftop gardens really, really are so important. Let's get to the slides, and if I can work this, we'll see how we're going to go. First of all, this is Villandry. It's a very large, decorative, edible garden in France, in the Loire Valley. It has been there for several hundred years, and it is, well, I'm sure it's the biggest one. I could stand to be corrected, but it is amazing and absolutely beautiful. Everything is edible: the roses, the cabbages, the marigolds, etc. And it very nicely shows that a garden, an edible garden, is never ever finished. When you take something out, you put something else in, so that there's never any bare spaces. For instance, here we see the gardeners are pulling out the broad beans, which are a cool weather crop. This picture was taken beginning July. So they're getting rid of the broad beans, they're finished, and they're planting peppers. They're hot crop. And you'll see that in several other gardens as well. This is another garden, a Valmar, also in the Loire Valley. And as in the Lost Gardens of Helligan, which is another garden set up in a similar way with a pond in the center. That's the only source of water. As it was on the farm where I was raised, nothing was ever watered. The day it was planted, if it was going to be a transplant, the hole was dug. Dad dug the holes because he spaced them. My job, yay high, was to fill each hole with water, right to the top. And sometimes when I was getting near the end of the row and the can was empty, I'd kind of cheat, and only put half a hole of water. And my father always knew. I thought he was some kind of magic. I didn't realize that water leaves a watermark when it anyway, and I couldn't fool him. And it was always, get back here with that watering, and the well was so far away. But anyway, then he would take the transplant, open up the soil ball, if it had been grown in a pot, put it into the pre-moistened hole, firm it in, and that was it. It was never watered again. Now, people wouldn't even think to do that today. You water your gardens to death. Believe me, this garden hadn't seen a rain for a month when this picture was taken. The soil was so hard that there was a young gardener trying to get a spade into the ground and couldn't get it in. But the garden was flourishing. It's pretty incredible when you think about it. In some gardens, the edibles are hidden away. This is a garden in France which has beautiful, beautiful borders, decorative borders. But if you go behind the borders, you see the gardener and the rows of veggies. Well, that's one way of doing it, and it's kind of what happened in suburban Ontario here. The vegetable garden was hidden away at the back of the property. And if you planted shade trees, it wasn't a good place to grow vegetables. Much better to grow them in the front yard, which is lovely and sunny. This is a wonderful garden, a Ballymaloe Cookery School, that I'm going to be visiting on my tour to Ireland in September. There's still some spaces if anybody would like to join me. And you can see that there are some crops at full size, and you can see there are other crops just planted. And it points out that you just never leave. If you harvest something, you plant something else. And it takes a bit of planning to get this all organized and to have the plants ready, because the nurseries sort of stop selling them after the middle of June. So sometimes you have to do a little bit of your own propagating. This is a garden at New York Botanic Garden, in their vegetable garden. And here we see chard in its glory and nasturtiums, the most wonderful flower in the world. It's so good. And marigolds, etc. And New York is one of my other tours, and we'll be visiting this garden. This is at the New York Botanic Garden. And this was on one of our tours, Hudson, Quebec. A magnificent home and property and lovely ornamental gardens. But here is her front walk. And what she got? Cabbages, marigolds, chard, etc. I asked her, how come you have your vegetables right here? And she said, it's the closest place to my kitchen and it's the sunniest place we have. So I rest my case. I think one of the first times I went to Hampton Court, and this is at the Hampton Court Flower Show, but it's one of the gardens that's always there. I saw this bed of geraniums and salvias, but I saw this lovely ornamental burgundy plant around the edging. And I thought, ooh, because I was in my burgundy phase at that point. You know, sometimes you go through color phases, and I was in my burgundy phase, so I rushed over to see what it was, this new plant I'd never seen. Bull's blood beets. But here at Hampton Court, okay, well, I guess I can do that too then. This is at Wisley Garden in England. This is one of their lettuce mosaics. And when we went on into the garden, we found that they were doing a trial test, as they do every year on different things. This year they were testing 36 different varieties of lettuce. 36 different varieties. We now grow about 20 different ones and change them up year after year. And it was really interesting because the judges were there that day doing a taste test. You think one lettuce tastes like the other? Well, think again. No, and they don't look alike as well. We went to the area where the students have their plots, the students at Wisley, and they were showing people how to make plantings of edibles in very tiny spaces, how to make them decorative as well as edible. So we see the wonderful purple cabbage and some purple lettuces in the foreground. They're potatoes. The one thing that they do in Europe that I don't do and haven't copied, and that is they make edges of boxwood. Well, I'm sorry, I don't have enough space for edges of boxwood. I don't have enough time to do all the pruning that boxwood needs doing. Besides, I don't eat it. And it's very hard to get over the edge into the garden. So I do all sorts of other lovely edges, which may be alpine strawberries or winter savory or parsley, whatever. But all of my edges are also edible. Okay, raised beds. Raised beds are a great way to, if your soil's not perfect, particularly. But it's also another good thing. When there's an edge there, you don't step into the garden. And that's the next rule. All of your gardens must be laid out so that you never step on the soil and compact it. Okay? And you see here they've got cloth over because obviously they were trying to prevent carrot fly or whatever. But whatever. Higher raised beds are wonderful if you're of an age where your knees don't like to get down on the ground anymore. Anybody else in that predicament? It's a dreadful one. I like it when the gardens are raised about this high. That works really, really nicely. However, when you're making these beds, it's really important that you make them of a size where you can reach into the middle. I often tell the story to put it really into perspective. When my mom reached an age when she had to go into a retirement home, they said, you know, we have raised garden beds out back if your mother would like a garden. And I thought, perfect, because when someone has Alzheimer's, it's kind of difficult to find things to talk about when you visit. So I said, fine, when I go every week, Mum and I will garden, and that will be a good thing for us to do together. So Anyway, one week I went to visit her and I couldn't find her. She wasn't in her room. She wasn't in the lounge. And one of the nurses said, "Oh, I think she went out to her garden." I said, "Oh, good. Okay, I'll get her there." As I'm rounding the corner, I see her walker sitting beside the bed, which was about this high, and Mother was in the middle of the bed. Because there was a weed in there she wanted to pull. Thankfully, I came along when I did, because had I not, she would have broken a hip getting out of the garden. So always make sure you can reach into the middle. Okay, so that's sizing is of great importance when you're laying out beds. Now, this is Helen Dillon's garden in Dublin. Anybody ever been to Helen Dillon's garden in Dublin? Isn't it the most wonderful garden in the world? Right. Well, we're scheduled to go there the last week of September, the last day of the tour. And I found out yesterday that she's just put the garden up for sale. But she's asking a very big amount of money for it, so I'm sure it won't be sold and gone by the time we called her, and we're still on for the end of September. So she's not going to make a fast move. But she is 78 years old and finding this beautiful acre garden just a little much, and so they're downsizing. But anyway, look at her beautiful garden. This is such a beautiful combination. I don't know how well it's showing up without the room being darkened, but alliums and Hesperus matronalis, Dame's Rocket. We only grow it along the roadside. Here it is en masse in one of the biggest and most beautiful gardens in Ireland. But just go around behind it, follow the path around, and what will you see but her vegetables, her leeks and onions and all sorts of other things in behind the ornamental part of her garden. So if she can do it, so can you. One of the places that's really, really fun is gardening way up high. And every rooftop in every city should have a garden on top of it. All of those condos, people should be able to put raised beds up top and garden there. This is the Fairmont Royal York. You can see how close it is actually to that monstrosity that sits up over our city. But here it is, the garden and its raised beds, and absolutely fascinating place to grow plants. The lavender does very, very well. It actually overwinters in those beds, which are only a foot deep. I mean, the beds are higher, but there's only a foot of soil. They even have grapes growing up there. My son Jeff designed the containers for them and had it lined with styrofoam, a nice thick layer of styrofoam, and that is what has got them through the winter. Well, they do protect them as well with wrapping them up. One of the combinations that I just love, I love cabbages, by the way. I think cabbages are such a beautiful plant. And here, combined with feathery dill, what a nice combination. And another thing, we need to really think about the bees. And we need to plant plants that they're going to pollinate and going to keep them happy. I'm really worried about the bees this spring, because usually at this time of year, the bees are foraging in the garden just almost in a panic, because they have to get food right away. And my heather crop this year got frozen in that second week of February. So instead of having great patches of heather, I have just a few little bits that were under snow. The snowdrops have been attacked by them, but there's been very few days when it's been warm enough for them to be out. So I'm hoping they're okay. These are the ones, a sense of humor here. Names that they gave: the Royal Sweet, the Honeymoon Sweet, the Comb Sweet Comb. Yeah, well, anyway, they had fun. Well, this is an interesting plant. Remember I said I'm in my burgundy phase? And this is at Hadspin House Garden, way back, I guess in the early 90s. And this beautiful burgundy plant is just about to burst into flower. Anybody can tell from there what it is? Pardon? No. It's, well, I came home and planted it in my own garden, my own ornamental garden, and there were these lovely 3 plants, beautiful pyramidal shape. The number of people who came into the nursery that year and said, "What's that beautiful burgundy plant in your garden?" And I said, "It's lettuce." And they said, "No, no, no, you don't know which one I'm referring to." I said, "Yes, I do, and it's lettuce." "No, you don't. Come, I'll show you." I walked to that garden and ascertained, yes, it is a bolting lettuce. When lettuce is finished its lovely edible phase, it makes this lovely tall column, flowers on top, and then is finished because it's an annual. But that was great fun. Anyway, a little bit about my potager. The reason I planted one of my own was that they asked me at the TBG to please teach a class on the potager garden. And I said, how can I do that? I've never grown one. And they said, "Well, you've been to lots all around the world." So anyway, I said to my son, "Okay, I need a place to plant a potager." And I said, "Is there any extra space in the stock bed?" And he said, "Mother, you can't plant something that's you want to show people by putting it in the stock bed. You've got to put it out in the open where everybody can see it." So we looked for a place, and we found this 20-foot by 20-foot area. It's right along the front walk. And so and it's pretty sunny. This tree was not very big at the time and didn't do much anyway, so there we go. So we laid out our pathway. Now, the garden is already planted. This was a late April snow. But you'll see in a minute it didn't do any damage because it was only one of those that was just like, -1 degree, so it was okay. And I'd only planted the cold weather stuff. But you can see how I've laid it out. This is the main access. And then you can go this way, or you can go there, there, there. Always wide enough to wheel the wheelbarrow. So make sure you don't make your paths too narrow, because that's where you're going to do all your work. All your planting, all your picking, all your putting compost on, etc. is going to be from one of these, because you're never going to step in here. Okay? You're never going to compact the soil. And you're never, ever going to have to rototill it, or turn it over with a fork, or double dig, or do any of those things. They're all a no-no. You put compost on top, and the worms and the microbes and all those things do all the work for you. Okay? So, notice that we've made an outline. There's a gazebo there. There's an old shed and the rain barrel. A nice obelisk here. This plastic pot, which we used, has been replaced by a wooden pot, which looks much better. But anyway, and the sundial in the middle. It's always nice to have kind of a center. Now, I maybe could have done something more elaborate, but in 20 feet by 20 feet, you can't do a whole lot. It's not Villandry after all. Here we are, a little bit later in the season, or at least after the snow melted, and you can see that my spring garden is getting quite well established. The leeks, the lettuces, the chards, etc. And a little further on, and you can see that it's right there. I can actually harvest and take it to the kitchen all within a matter of seconds. Actually, I've become what's called a grazer. I eat a lot of food just right while I'm in the garden. It never gets anywhere. And of course, underneath the sundial, I've planted several varieties of thyme. Now, what else would you plant under a sundial? I mean, really. I love leeks. They look like wonderful silver soldiers marching along the path's edge. But that can only be 1 year. Then the next year something else has to be there. It becomes a real challenge to do crop rotation in such a small garden, but you really want to do that, okay? So sometimes the leeks are down the center, other times they're edging the beds, however. And actually, this year I'm not growing leeks at all. I'm very, very saddened by the fact that the leek moth has discovered my potager. Anybody else have leek moth problems? Well, be prepared. Anyway, I'm not growing leeks this year. I'm leaving it completely free of leeks in hopes that it doesn't go to the garlic, because I have grown some garlic. But anyway, matter of fact, the garlic is pretty special right now. It's this high, and when it's covered with snow, these little green spikes sticking up through the snow are absolutely miraculous. So let's look at the cool season crops, because once you get your potager, your position where you're going to have it, then you have to really know your plants and know what gets planted first and what gets planted later, because otherwise it just doesn't work. You can't have a plot that's half empty. You have to keep it going all the time. So one of the first cool season crops, of course, is mesclun. And you can buy all sorts of, oh well, this is good, mesclun, spicy mesclun, herbal mesclun, Richters special mesclun. But what mesclun is, it's salad greens. How much do you pay for a bag of salad greens? A whole lot. Well, you know what? You can grow your own. And you can get it started right away, actually. Mesclun is just simply a variety of greens. And what I do, this doesn't help Richters much, but I save all my leftover seeds. So all my lettuce leftover, chard leftover, onions leftover, anything, kale, whatever. And I just put it all in a jar, and that's my mesclun for the next year. So it's a great way to use up leftover seed. You sow it thickly so that they're all coming together in a pot like that. And then you just take your salad bowl out and your scissors and you just snip, snip, snip until you have as much as you like. Don't snip too low, because if you don't do that, they'll regrow. And you can get, quite a few salads out of one pot. But it's a good idea to have several pots coming along, so you always have fresh, young, tender salad leaves. And you don't even really need a pot. I snapped this picture at Wisley in England. They just simply sliced open the bag, put some seeds in, and there you go. Fun. Another early one is radish. And it's a radish doesn't like it in the hot summer months, so you must get them in when it's cool. Sometimes I mix the seed with my carrots seed, because carrot seed is very, very fine and difficult to sow sometimes, and the radish comes up first anyway, marks the row, and as you use the radish, then you've thinned the carrots. By the way, we should just talk about carrots for just a minute. I had a difficult time growing carrots in my very sandy soil, and you'd think they'd be perfect, but the trouble was, I think they sort of went to China down through the down through the sand. And so, if you have trouble getting carrots to germinate, when you make your little furrow, water it. That firms it. Then you put your seed in, cover it, and they have a much better chance of germinating. One year I actually went to all the trouble of sowing the seed in the greenhouse and transplanting them. But I was desperate to have carrots. And then I found that also it works really well to do carrots in pots. And you can get the little short ones, but if you've got a deep pot, you can grow the nice long ones too. But we'll talk a little bit more about carrots in a minute. I think the one thing that everybody should have in their garden is chard. It used to be green, now it's every color under the sun, and called rainbow. But it's one of those things that you can plant in April, and it continues to give you a harvest all the way through till next Christmas or whenever the snow covers it up. So it's a great, and it stays in its place, and you don't have to worry about, I've used all my lettuce up, now what do I plant here next? So that's really important. Anyway, chard is wonderful. I know we often use it ornamentally in ornamental gardens and in containers just because it looks so beautiful. And one lady said to me, I said to her at the end of the season, I said, how did you like the chard in your container? She said, well, it got kind of big and sort of took over. And I said, didn't you ever eat it? And she said, no, I didn't want to spoil it. I said, well, you only make it better by eating the outside leaves. So don't forget that, chard is one of my favorite things. Here you see it growing in the garden, and that's the yellow one, which is great. They're all wonderful. But you know what? Sometimes I like the good old green one. I think it has a little bit more flavor, but that's up to you. Lettuce. Well, lettuce comes in all sorts of shapes and sizes and types, and from burgundy to gold. And if you only know iceberg lettuce, have you got a lot of learning to do, because we don't even grow iceberg lettuce. We don't grow head lettuce because it doesn't like our hot, hot summers anyway. So I think my favorite is butter crunch, or butterhead it's called. And if you ask for a salad in Europe, that's the only kind of green you're going to get, actually. It is the very favorite. But lots of different color combinations, and I think this is a perfect early spring garden. We've got parsley for the edge, in between it, little violas, then calendulas, then lettuce, and some chard, everything at peak by about the end of April, 1st of May, in a usual year. Not so much this year. But, how can anybody not love that? And to know that they're edible, they're tasty, and sometimes some varieties don't last well during the summer, but that's okay, because you see by then, if it gets very hot and these sort of peter out, the parsley's got 3 times as big, and so it's just a delight, okay? And in containers. What do you do with your early spring containers? Well, you fill them full of lettuce and pansies or violas. And then, by the end of May, when you're ready to plant your hot plants, you've eaten all of these. So just, you're never wasting anything. Here we see a lovely burgundy lettuce with burgundy blotch pansies. Calendula is another cool lover. And this one is a little one. It's got a really cute name. It's called Oopsie Daisy Calendula, which is kind of, usually they're not bicolors, they're solid colors. You don't eat the leaves of this one, but you eat the flowers. And you can just pick them off and put them in your salad, or you can use them, cook them with your rice, and it will color them so it looks like saffron rice, which is kind of fun. These will self-seed in your garden and be nice early bloom for you. Mustard. This is the burgundy mustard, and it's absolutely incredible. Here it is planted, not in a vegetable garden, but in a flower garden. And it's not only delicious, but a very ornamental plant as well. Another thing that you use lettuce for is spacing. Now this is a Brussels sprouts, and it's going to get big and need lots of space. But when it's just planted, it's just this little plant. So I've tucked lettuce all around it. And when I've used the lettuce up, it gives space for the Brussels sprouts to develop and carry on. So the lettuce here is not only a salad, it's a space holder. Here's a garden in Chicago, Botanic Garden, that I snapped one day. Lettuce and pansies, and the end of May, they're all taken out, and they plant squash there instead. So you know, that's just the way you have to keep at it. Now, this is a green leaf lettuce that I've allowed to go to seed. I just decided, I didn't leave all of them, but I took a picture of them before I pulled them all out. And I left it because it flowers. It's quite pretty, actually, little yellow flowers. And then it scatters its seed all over the place. So I have lettuce coming up wherever. Where you couldn't plant it. Mother Nature can do it. We can't. But it was in cracks in the gravel and walkway and so on. It was great fun. The cabbage family are all cool lovers. Broccoli, cabbage, kale, etc. And remember that when you harvest your broccoli, don't cut it way down here or take the whole plant out. Because when you've harvested, it makes little sprouts happen all lower down on the stem. So you can be harvesting broccoli from the same plant all summer long. And then you don't have to plant something else in that space. Cabbages, the same way. Don't cut them or remove them all the way, because you'll get lovely little Brussels sprout-sized cabbages that are absolutely delicious. The same for kale. If you cut the top off a kale plant, you're going to get all these little kale sprouts, and they are even better than the big one that you cut. They're somehow more tender, more flavorful. Here we have a Savoy cabbage, which is my favorite, under a netting to protect it from the cabbage butterfly. This is what I like to do. I like to take the Tahiti's marigolds, these lovely little marigolds, and plant them around my cabbages, because the smell of these confuses the cabbage butterfly, at least for half the season anyway. And we also have a butterfly net hanging beside the garden, and whoever happens to have a few moments and sees cabbage butterflies, they go and catch them. You tried that? Well, there was a helper in my garden tried that too. She says, "I've caught 3 of them. Now what do I do?" Oh. And I said, "Now you squish them." "Oh, but I couldn't kill a butterfly." I said, "Well, then you can pick the worms out of the cabbages when it's time when it's time to eat them." You know, cabbage butterflies, they're white. Little. They flutter all around cabbages and Brussels sprouts and so on. And yeah, well, no, they're butterflies because they do it by day. It's not at night, you see. So anyway, I have to tell you that when I was a youngster on the farm, my only way of making money was to kill tomato hornworms. You know, those great big fat juicy ones? I got a penny apiece for every one I killed. So I had 2 killing stones, and they made a great job squishing. I mean, when you're raised that way, it's not a problem to squish something that's eating your crop. If you don't have a lot of space, cabbages take up a fair bit of space. Look for this one. This is a pointed cabbage instead of round. And I like the flavor really, really well. I think they're sweeter. They're called colobos. There's some different names for them, though. But they've made their way here. I used to have to get the seed in England, but now it's available here. So look for the pointed cabbages. They don't take up nearly as much space. Kale. I can't think why, but 10 years ago, did anybody plant kale? Well, a few people did. Yeah. But now, kale is this superfood. It has had the best press of any vegetable I've ever known. Now it's the thing you have to eat, you must eat, you make chips out of it. Okay, well, anyway, kale is very decorative in the garden as well. I love dinosaur kale. It has the most gorgeous, gorgeous leaves, and everything looks better growing beside it, I think. A lovely burgundy kale, here shown at Inverview Gardens in Scotland, which is on next year's agenda, with calendula planted beside it. It gets more purple as the season goes on and is absolutely a delight. But look at this for foliage. You know, when you're doing an ornamental bed, you always think foliage, foliage, foliage to set everything off. Well, we have the dinosaur kale, the silver leeks, and sage in the foreground. What a lovely picture. There aren't, I don't think, any flowers that can do better than that. And I just want to tell you that once you start growing vegetables, they are more interesting historically and every way than flowers. I mean, I love my ornamental beds, but the vegetables are so much better. You need to look for this book. It's called How Carrots Won the Trojan War. And it's fascinating stories about vegetables. Has anybody else seen this book and read it? Have you? It's great, isn't it? And it's just one chapter at a time, a chapter on carrots, a chapter on corn, etc. And it's just a delight. You have to find it and enjoy it. For instance, way back in probably the 1800s, not very many people had celery. This is the upper class, had celery on their table. So the celery was presented in a vase where it stood upright and everybody could know that you had celery on your table. By the 1900s, when it was more common, the celery dish is a low flat dish. And it wasn't so important to let the world know that you had celery on your table. And if you'll go back and look at antique dishes, you'll find that that's exactly true. The celery vase was upright, and then the celery dish was a flat one. So there's all sorts of interesting things like that. I just couldn't not throw that in. Kale and cabbages and poppies. This is at the Montreal Botanic Garden. Not in their vegetable garden, but in their decorative area. Great combinations. I wish it was darker in here, but if it was going to be darker, I guess we'd have a storm, and we don't want that, do we? Brussels sprouts, again. Some things you plant because they hold the space and you don't have to worry about what's going to go there when I take the plant out and have to put something else in. Brussels sprouts are great because they'll be there till Christmas. And the later you harvest them, the better they taste. We've become also accustomed to finding in our grocery stores lots and lots of Asian vegetables, and all of the bok choy and Chinese cabbage and lettuce, etc. all are cool weather crops and should be planted early. Onions can be grown many different ways, from seed, from transplants, and from sets. And sets are really just little onions that are going to grow again, because they're really a perennial, actually. Now, this was the first thing I ever planted in a garden, because that's something the children can help you with. I was about 3, I think, when I started planting onions. And you had to space them so that they'd get nice and big. But now that I have only a 20-foot by 20-foot garden, I plant my onion sets side by side, almost touching each other. And when they start to grow, I harvest every other one as a green onion. And then I harvest every other one as a mid-sized onion. And then I have lots of space for the remainder to get big. So that's thinning, and using your thinnings is a really great way to get things organized in your potager. Now, you may not get onions this big. This was taken at the Harrogate Fall Flower Show when the onions were absolutely massive. But even if you don't, you just get regular cooking size, it's really a good idea to cure them so that they'll keep over the winter. And this was a great idea. This are onions in a pantyhose. So you put an onion in the bottom, you twist it, you put another onion in, and you hang them. And they stay beautiful all winter long. Now, what happens when it's about right now and you've got an onion that's sprouted, and you cut it open and it's all kind of yucky in the middle, and so it's compost? I don't let that happen. I do what my mother used to always do late winter. If she had a sprouted onion, she'd pot it up in about a 5-inch pot, put it on her windowsill, and in a few weeks she had green onions. So you never waste anything. You can do the same thing with garlic. If garlic gets kind of dry, break it up into its cloves, put half a dozen of cloves in a pot, put it on your windowsill, and it will grow. And as soon as it gets about so high, just start snipping it off with your scissors. I don't really like garlic. I find it a bit too strong for my taste. But I love the greens of garlic. And so to me, that's the perfect way to do garlic. Leeks, well, this was also at the Harrogate Fall show, and leeks are massive. Wouldn't it be wonderful to have leeks with that much? One leek could make a pot of leek and potato soup at that rate of going, but they're grown in a very specialized way. And this picture was taken at Great Dixter, Christopher Lloyd's garden, and he had these wonderful collars that he put around his leeks, and they were made of clay. And I thought, what a wonderful idea. So I went to the little shop that they have there, and I priced one of these. It was £2.50, which was about the equivalent of $4.50 our money. So I bought one. You can use other things if you like. You can use toilet paper rolls, or you can use all sorts of things to keep the leeks white. And you can see that he's actually going to be filling them in. They were sort of planted in trenches. Beets. We're still on the cool weather crops, people. So all this is going to get planted before May. Believe it or not. Yeah, right. Well, maybe not this year, as I said earlier, but beet seeds are quite interesting because they're not one seed. There's usually 3 or 4 seeds in a beet seed, and so if you don't thin them out, you're going to end up with very crowded plants. But the nice thing is you can eat the thinnings, either as a salad or in a stir fry. All of that's excellent. And beets are the other vegetable that's really made great headway. I mean, when I was a kid, we only had round, purple beets. Now you've got golden, white, concentrically striped. You've got round ones, you've got long ones. That's what I like, because then when you make beet pickle, all the pickles are the same size and they fit really nicely in a jar. So if you haven't grown long beets, think about it. And of course, my good old beets bull's blood, which have gorgeous decorative foliage. And they're edible as well. So, you know, and they can stay in place all season, and you don't have to harvest them till the fall. Well, until William of Orange from Holland, all carrots were orange. But prior to that, all carrots were not orange. They only developed the orange carrots when William of Orange was king. And before that, they'd been what we see now, burgundy, white, yellow. It's kind of fun. It makes your garden a little more colorful. One thing I should tell you about carrots. I see my grandson has arrived, and he won't mind if I tell you this story. One time we had grown carrots in a pot, and we were sitting there on a nice sunny day, and we were just pulling them out and eating them. We weren't washing them or any of those things. You just wipe them on your pant leg and just eat them. I mean, now they're saying that that's the way we should raise our children, so that they're exposed to all these kind of things, and then they won't get sick. Anyway, Derek says to me, "Graham, can we eat the leaves?" And I thought, well, I don't know. We eat the leaves of beets. Yeah, we do. Do we eat the leaves of carrot? I said, I'm not very sure about that. And you know, the very next day I picked up a copy of Canadian Living magazine, and there was a recipe for carrot top soup. And you know, and you just chop them up and they just taste like carrots in the soup. So there you go. You can eat the tops. You know how they throw them away at the grocery store, or they give them to people to take home for their rabbits or whatever? Well, it's good for rabbits, it's good for us too. Anyway, we get carrots such as this now, sometimes all purple. Actually, I was in the grocery store yesterday and I'm walking along and I thought, what is that? And then I realized it was carrots. They were this long and they were purple, purple, purple. Big bunches of them. So it was interesting. Peas. Okay, well, there's nothing like peas, of course. But if you have a small space, peas take up a lot of room. And it takes an awful lot of pods to be opened to make equivalent of a can of peas. And so in a small space, I grow the little snow peas or the snap pod peas where you eat pod and all. It's much more suitable for a small space because they take up a lot of room. This is back at Ballymaloe Cookery School again, where they have them all festooned up. They like to climb. And here's another thing you can do. You can plant your climbing peas on the same trellis that you have other things. Here it's golden hops. You might do it with clematis. You might make your trellises multi-use instead of just one thing, especially if the one thing is early and the other thing is late. So you have peas that are early and then your clematis blooms in the fall. Why not? The peas will be all finished by then. Potatoes came to us from Peru, South America, and there's a lovely story in the book here that when they were first brought to the cooks at the palace, at a palace in London, she looked at the ugly roots on them, all sort of knobbly and warty, and she threw them out and cooked the foliage and very nearly killed the entire court with her not very good meal. And now, of course, there's all kinds of potatoes, and you could grow them in the ground, but most of us don't have enough space in our very small areas, so they make quite a decorative plant. And you could put them in your garden, in behind something that's going to bloom in the fall, like maybe tall asters, because the potatoes will be all finished and removed by then. I like to grow them in tubs, and what I do is I only fill the soil up to about here, plant my potatoes, and as they grow, I fill in more soil, because potatoes are stem rooters, and they are going to make lots more tubers at the end of the root structures that they send out, and you can get lots more in there. They look very nice when they're growing up. This is a purple potato, so they have purple stems. So that's kind of interesting, another little bit of color. Here they are at the TBG growing in pots as well. Now, I saw this in England, and I haven't seen them here yet, but this is really neat. It looks sort of like a composter that you open the bottom and take the compost out, but here you can open the bottom and take the potatoes out. Wow. Now, I haven't seen any here like that yet, but who knows? You could use an old composter, or a new composter for that matter. Okay, so foliage texture again. We're back to that. Sage, parsley, and here we have a lovely little flower, very decorative foliage, nigella, the seeds of which are black cumin. So, there you go. We're going to look at some perennials. So these are things that will always stay. Asparagus. Now, I think this would be the perfect backdrop for an ornamental perennial bed, because when the asparagus is growing, your other perennials are only this high, so it's easy to harvest and see it. Then in the summertime, it grows so high and has lovely foliage, and it could be a perfect backdrop. Okay? Rhubarb. This is a very special rhubarb. This is the rhubarb at Mr. McGregor's garden at Beatrix Potter's Hilltop Farm in the Lake District. And notice that that silly old duck has laid her egg underneath the rhubarb. The rhubarb was the very first job on the farm. We went out and we covered it all. Now in England they use lovely clay cloches, you know, which are absolutely gorgeous, but costly. We used old pails, old boxes, anything we had that maybe had a hole in it or couldn't be used for anything else. That was the cover for the rhubarb. And we had the very first rhubarb on the market and it was early. So, hi, if you can find your rhubarb, as soon as it starts to go through, take and put an old bucket over it. And oh, it's so delicious, the first spring, slightly forced rhubarb. Here at Les Quatre-Vents Garden, northern Quebec, where it's too cold for them to grow Rheum palmatum, which is the beautiful ornamental rhubarb, they're just growing the regular old everyday rhubarb, and it looks pretty decorative there as well. Okay, that's it for the cool crops, pretty much. We're getting into hot weather now. It's going to happen. And I think beans tell the story. I had a neighbor who used to always do all her vegetable garden on the 24th of May. That's when you planted vegetables, obviously, right? And her beans always just started to produce the first 2 weeks in July when they went on holidays. So every year she'd say, oh, you better pick my beans for me and you might as well use them. Well, this went on for a couple of years and I couldn't do it any longer. I said, you know, if you'd plant your beans the middle of June, they'd be ready for you to pick when you come home from your holidays. Oh, but I thought you had to plant everything the 24th of May. No, you don't. Get over that 24th of May thing. It's anyway, but you do have to wait until the soil warms up to plant beans. Beans, if you put beans in cold soil, they'll just sulk and rot. So forget it. Kind of like basil. If you try and put your basil in a week too early, forget it. You'll be phoning me on the radio show Saturday morning saying, my basil's not doing well. It's all sort of wilty looking. Well, yeah, okay. You planted it too early. There's pole beans and there's bush beans. Now, if you have to make the space, keep your pole beans, plant pole beans instead of bush beans because they'll produce longer. Okay, they'll produce all summer, whereas bush beans, it's usually only a few weeks. And then you'll have to replace them, replant them. And of course, they make a great teepee for children. So if you don't know where else to plant, make a bean teepee for youngsters who come to visit. What a lovely hidey place, and they may even get to like beans. Corn, forget corn in a small space. Corn needs a big area to, because it's wind pollinated, you need to sort of plant lots of it, okay? So it's better left to the farmers. The one thing you might like to try is the Three Sisters. And the Three Sisters is the way our native people who lived here long before we ever thought of being here planted. They dug a hole, they put a dead fish in the bottom. We use fish food now, I mean, don't we, for fertilizers? And they did too. Then they plant their corn seeds, and when the corn starts to grow up, they planted beans at the bottom. The beans grew up around the corn, and then they planted squash or pumpkins as a ground cover on the bottom. And those three work very, very well together. I think most people, if they've only ever grown one thing, they've grown tomatoes, because it's just wonderful to have great big tomatoes warmed by the sun. There's nothing nicer. But tomatoes can be a heck of a lot of fun and can be a whole day's talk unto themselves because they come every color: white, yellow, orange, green when they're ripe, blue, purple. They're awful hard to tell when they're ripe, the green ones, aren't they? All kinds of striped, different shapes and sizes, from tiny, tiny little marbles to great big 2.5 pounders. So you could have a whole garden just tomatoes. This one is called plum lemon. Those are tomatoes. Those are tomatoes. They look like lemons. but they really are tomatoes. And most people tend to grow them up as well. And the important thing is that when you do that, you need to take the little buds that develop in the angles of the other stems to prune those out so that you get one stalk. That's not how we grew them on the farm. We let them grow just wherever they wanted, and they grew on the ground. And that also helped to prevent them from drying out, and they didn't need watering. Or you can let them sort of go. This is a spalliate on the wall in the courtyard at Chanticleer Garden near Philadelphia. But however you grow them, what kind of support you use, if it's old hockey sticks being recycled, it doesn't matter. It's the actual taste of a fresh tomato eaten under the sun even. Peppers, same family, hot, love it hot, and it's actually this year, the herb of the year is the chili pepper. So you all must grow chili peppers this year. I don't like hot peppers. But anyway, I'll grow some just because the rest of the family do. And you know, it's a good idea, I think, because your hot peppers sometimes don't reach maturity as quickly as you would like, and we have cold weather. If you grow them in pots, you can move them inside. Or put them, if you're going to be an early frost, you could put them in the garage overnight or something. And that's a good thing to do. But anyway, you'll have to come back here on May the 1st because Ken Brown is going to be doing a talk on chili peppers. So, and the first peppers and tomatoes were grown because they were ornamental, not because they were edible at all. So I think they're quite lovely. In the same family, the Solanum family, we have eggplants. And eggplants are a whole world unto themselves too, because they can be white, orange, green. We mostly know the purple ones, but they're a wonderful, hot, loving plant. Squashes. If you haven't been to the Royal Winter Fair, you should go simply to see the squash display. It is absolutely amazing. The variety and types of the winter squashes, and these are the ones that have the hard rind that you can keep for a long time, and you can still be eating the produce from your garden in January, February. That's really a good trick, is if you can do that. So there are summer squashes, and they're the little sun drops. And the winter squashes, probably the best known is the butternut, but not only, there's lots of others. And then there's spaghetti squash, which, well, it's only really as good as the sauce you put on it, methinks. But anyway, it's a great way to get children to eat veggies. And know that if you have trouble space, that squashes will grow up. They have lovely tendrils, and often they're very big in our little gardens, so we want to grow them up. Or look for the word bush habit, because the bush habit then will be not such a big runner, but stay in one place. Well, watermelon, they're great too, and just, again, a hot crop, and you may want to put plastic down. Now these melons were grown in England in a greenhouse, and each melon, and they were grown up, and each melon had its own little hammock. Well, that's a bit much work for me. I like a little more easy care than that. Cucumbers, I love to grow cucumbers, and I grow them vertically all the time, and I found that I really like the little ones. You know, I live alone, so it's lovely to watch a cucumber get this big, but then to eat it takes me a long time. So I like the little ones that I can just pick off the vine and eat right in the garden. Pumpkins, they can be fun too, but also take space. The little tiny ones could be grown up. The other thing is about zucchini. I know people who say, I'm never planting zucchini again. I had so many, I couldn't get rid of them. Couldn't give them away. Everybody else had zucchini. If you have too many zucchini, you simply eat the flowers. The flowers are delicious, and then you won't have so many zucchini. Malabar spinach is interesting. Most spinach is a cool crop and it's finished very early. This is one, it's not really spinach, but it kind of looks and tastes like spinach, and it loves it hot, so it grows up a trellis all summer long. Now, somebody asked me something I didn't know the answer for today, and they wondered if you could eat the little flowers of Malabar spinach. Has anybody ever tried that? Okay, so we'll have to do some more research. I don't just go and eat it because I said so. That's not the kind of research I meant, because that could get you into trouble. Rhubarb is wonderful. Rhubarb leaves are not. But this is what the little flowers look like. They're pretty, but I don't know if they're edible. So, pardon? Yes, the seeds after the flowers too. Now, we'll talk in a minute about okra. If you've never had okra, okra is what makes chicken gumbo gumbo. It's that flavor that makes it a little bit different. Garlic. I think the best thing about garlic is when it makes those wonderful scapes in June. They're so decorative and they taste absolutely wonderful. Look at that. Isn't that amazing? But you remember that your garlic is planted in October, like your tulips, and then it's harvested in July. So you've got to have something ready to put in where you're taking the others out, okay? Where you're taking your garlic out. Nasturtiums. They're the best plant in the whole world. These guys. Every part of it is edible. And the flowers, the leaves. But the best thing are the little seed pods. Now, the seed pods, when they're still green, before they turn brown, those seed pods are absolutely to die for. And if you pickle them with a little bit of vinegar and water, they're just like capers. Yeah. So, and they're great. I just think they're the best thing going. Did you know you could eat dahlias? The tubers. When you have too many tubers, or you have those tubers that are blind and they don't have any eye on them, what do you do with the silly things? You can cut them up, peel them, cut them up, and use them in place of water chestnuts in Chinese cooking. And you can also take them and grind them up or cut them up finely and use them in place of zucchini when you're making zucchini bread. So you can make dahlia bread instead of zucchini bread. So never have too many of those. Roses, rose petal jam. And the hips, the rose hips, have more vitamin C than oranges. Absolutely to die for. It was a herb of the year not so long ago either, and all kinds of things you could do with roses. Now, I know you'll not be able to see this because it's not dark enough, but this is a fuchsia, okay, a big fuchsia. And here you can see the flowers maybe, and these little black fruit on the fuchsias, they're to die for. Absolutely delicious. Usually we pick the blossoms off, so they'll flower more. Well, you don't have to. You can eat them. And you can make wine from them. You can make pies. You can do all sorts of things if you have enough. But I just like to pick them and eat them. Like strawberries, for instance. And that's another big thing. But alpine strawberries. They sell them here. The alpine strawberries that don't produce runners. Make sure it's runnerless or they'll all over the place. Well, that may be fine if you have lots of space, but if you don't, the runnerless alpine strawberries are they're about this big, and they're absolutely to die for. They'll fruit the first year from seed if you start early enough, like back in January, and they'll produce right from June right through till snow covers them. So if you haven't ever done alpine strawberries, they're going to be the edge at the front of my potager garden this year. I've had them back at the back of the potager, but then I have to go around there to pick them, and I walk past the other way so I can just pick them every time I go by. Currants, instead of having hedges, you know, plant currants or gooseberries or something else. This is a gooseberry grown as a tree form, and what a much better way of it. That picture was taken in Denmark, and I haven't seen them offered like that this here yet, but it'll be coming. Espalier fruit trees on a fence. Never leave a fence or a wall bare. Always put something on it. Or it can be the divider along your property line. Maybe inside the property line, so you make sure you get them. This is a lovely apple archway at the Lost Gardens of Helligan. Heritage orchards and apples. Oh, so many different varieties to choose from. Raspberries, blackberries. Fences, don't leave them bare. Cover them in fruits. Fig trees. Oh, yes. Look at this. Look at the figs coming along here. My fig tree's not quite this big. It'll be this big by the end of the summer. But it's overwintered in a very cool but bright room in my house, and it lost all its leaves. It went dormant. I didn't water it. It just sat there. And about 3 weeks ago, all of a sudden, the buds started to turn green, and it's all now leafed out, and we're going to take some cuttings from it and see if we can grow some more trees from cuttings. Grow vegetables in containers. This was a winner at the Hampton Court Flower Show. It has chard and tomatoes and parsley and beans and nasturtiums, everything all in one great big basket. Use whatever you can find to grow in. Here we see along a driveway using the space. The only thing I would do is I'd get rid of all that grass. I'd put pebbles there or something that didn't have to be cut because I think that's too much work. Straw bales, good idea for a container, and then the whole thing becomes compost afterwards. Eaves trough, remember what I said about don't ever have any bare walls or fences. Use them all. This is a pallet planter. Yeah, isn't that neat? So you can do that. These are old tires, brightly painted to be decorative, but filled with all kinds. And the one thing you could do is you could put potatoes in, and you could start them down here, add another tire and more soil as the potatoes grow up. All kinds of ideas. Cucumbers grow, especially the little ones, grow beautifully on a trellis in a pot. I love this. Chard, this is my favorite potscaping. Chard, looking like soldiers all around the center there with cabbages, and each of them sort of anchored in the ground with a little low creeping herb. So it's fun. Right in your perennial borders. Did you know that you can eat all parts of your daylily? Did you know that you can eat hosta shoots? Hostas, when they're this high, can be steamed just like asparagus. They're delicious. Borage, wonderful, and everybody has to plant some borage for the bees because the bees absolutely love it. Now I made this great statement, I'm not much for garlic. I'm also not much for basil. And how can I say that in a place like this and not get shot for, but it just doesn't suit my palate. But I always grow some, but you know, when you grow it, this is the lovely variegated one, and when you grow the green basil and the purple basil, you want to make sure that you snip the flowers off in order to keep making lots of greenery. But, now where did I put it? I had one here. Anyway, this though is Thai basil. And I grow it always because of the flowers. The flowers are absolutely delicious. They're just not quite as strong a basil flavor as the foliage is, and they make such a gorgeous statement in the garden. So there you go. Basil, Thai basil is great. You eat the flowers particularly. Don't forget your compost pile is a great place to grow pumpkins and squashes and all sorts of things that like to sprawl and cover it. You can grow anything anywhere. I once said, well, you couldn't grow sunflowers in the city. This is in Zurich, Switzerland. I rounded the corner and there were sunflowers growing on a balcony. I mean, plants just make liars of us all the time, don't they? You can make your garden as interesting as you like. You can use purple tomato cages if you wish, or stakes for your beans. This is a lovely little plot that a student had done at Wisley, and these are apple trees. Grown like grapes. So grown up, and then the branches growing along wires. What a neat way to grow apples. And so, I know we've gone over time, and I'll still stay and answer questions if anybody has questions, but I usually end a talk with happy gardening. But this one I always end with bon appetit. Because it tastes so much better when you've grown it yourself and you've had such fun doing it along the way. So I thank you very much. I'm sorry we were late starting and we've gone a little bit over time. But you're welcome.
At Richters, it's not just a garden, it's a whole new world. For herb plants, seeds, veggies, and more, visit us at richters.com or call 1-800-668-4372.